And now, here's your host, Don Cornelius.
Right now, we turn our attention to the Soul Train gang, the Soul Train line, the master storyteller, Mr. Curtis Mayfield, and the Show Enough False Speech Show, one it chose to call Get Down.
He had been in the club many times. Many people saw him, so they didn't have any fear at the time.
Soul Train wasn't just a show, it was a whole movement, a game changer. The place where black music, fashion, and dance got the attention they deserved. And running the whole thing, Don Cornelius. Always smooth, always sharp, the mastermind who built an empire from scratch.
When you believe in things that you don't understand.
But behind the glasses, the deep voice, and that famous sign-off was a man way more complicated than he let on. Cornelius wasn't just a visionary, he was intense, a perfectionist to the extreme. Some called him controlling, others straight up ruthless. He ran Soul Train like a kingdom, and he decided who got to stay and who got the boot.
For you.
Yes, Don.
Couldn't happen to a better person.
Hey, well, that's what I said last time I was on your show, and you disagreed with me.
Well, I've been wrong before, brother. You know, I know I said you would never be nothing.
His feuds were the stuff of legend. He didn't care if you were an artist, an exec, or an industry heavyweight. If you crossed him, you were out. And then there were the stories people didn't talk about as much, the ones that weren't just about business. His ex-wife had some disturbing things to say. There were whispers, accusations, and in the end, a tragic exit that left people wondering what really went down.
Dear y'all, my name is Shamar Moore, and believe me when I tell you, we getting ready to have some fun up in here. Why? Because I stand up here week after week trying to get you hyped over the fact that don't nobody throw a party like we do.
So, how did the man who changed black entertainment forever end up at the center of so much controversy? How did the face of Soul Train lose control of his own creation? And what really happened behind the scenes?
Anybody you can think of who is black, who works in television, and who owns the show and who has the title of executive producer, came.
So Don Cornelius wasn't just some TV guy. Like I said earlier, he was the brain behind a full-blown cultural shift. Back when mainstream networks barely gave black artists the time of day, he built a stage where soul, funk, and later hip-hop took center spotlight. Soul Train wasn't just another music show. It was the blueprint. The sound, the moves, the style, it all left a mark. And Cornelius, with that deep voice and laser-focused vision, made sure it hit different. Chicago-born and bred, he kicked off his career in journalism, covering news before realizing black music and culture needed their own space to thrive. Getting Soul Train on air wasn't easy, but he made it happen. First as a local show, then nationwide. And once it hit, there was no stopping it. Aretha, Marvin, Michael, Prince, if you mattered, you were there. But it wasn't just about the icons. The show put fresh talent on the map, changed the way people danced, and set trends that still hit decades later. He had his hands in everything, making sure Soul Train ran exactly how he wanted. Under him, it wasn't just a TV show, it turned into an empire, complete with music awards and a whole brand built around it. But behind all that gloss, things weren't always so pretty. There was drama. Fallouts with dancers, tensions with artists, and whispers about the man behind the scenes being way more complicated than the smooth image he put out. Don cashed out of the empire he built and dipped from the spotlight, but his name didn't stay quiet for long. Not for anything good, either. He got hauled in by the cops after things got violent at his place in LA. His estranged wife, a Russian model, had already filed restraining orders, and now he was facing charges for putting hands on her and trying to stop her from going to the police. At first, he denied everything, but later, he switched it up and took a deal. No jail time, just 3 years of probation. Decades after he changed the game, Don's name got dragged into something way darker. A documentary put him at the center of serious accusations. 2 former Playboy bunnies came forward, saying he trapped them in his house back in the day, kept them locked up for days, and did things too disturbing to ignore. His son shut it down, calling it all baseless, but the damage was done. The man who built a cultural movement now had his legacy tangled up in controversy that refused to fade. Let's talk about that first.
He had been in the club many times. Many people saw him, so they didn't have any fear at the time.
Don got hit with some seriously disturbing accusations. In the tell-all docuseries about the dark side of Playboy, an ex-bunny, PJ Maston, came forward with a story about him that's hard to stomach. According to her, he trapped and assaulted 2 young women years ago. Back in the day, she wasn't just any Playboy employee, she looked after the new girls, and from what she says, he had a reputation. Apparently, he had special treatment at Playboy, so women there knew who he was. But things took a turn when he set his sights on 2 fresh faces who had just joined. He pulled them into an exclusive area before convincing them to come back to his place for what they thought was just a party. The sisters thought they were just getting a fancy ride in his Rolls Royce, but once they got to his place, they vanished for 3 days. Nobody had a clue where they were. When they finally reappeared, they were in awful shape, barely holding it together. Turns out they had managed to escape, but not before going through something horrifying. They were found beaten, drugged, and completely wrecked. According to them, he locked them up in different rooms and put them through hell. The sisters were trapped, tied up, and completely powerless. One of them had no choice but to sit there, listening as the other was attacked. Calling the cops wasn't even an option. They knew how things worked at Playboy. Speaking out wasn't part of the deal. Instead, security stepped in, handled it behind closed doors, and that was that. They were warned to keep quiet and make sure the press never got wind of what really happened.
Brutalized. It was horrible, horrible. And as Playboy rules were, you couldn't call the police, you call the mansion, and Joe Piash.
PJ was apparently fuming because he got away with it, no consequences, nothing. A few days later, he strolled back into the club like it was just another weekend. After everything those women went through, not a single charge was filed. She carried the weight of staying quiet, but deep down, she knew speaking up wouldn't have changed a thing. No one would have taken her seriously, and Playboy was never going to let anything mess with his reputation.
Reports.
Security there was not about making sure these girls were safe. It was about making sure that the guests didn't do anything that Hefner would not have.
Once the documentary hit, Don's son, Tony, wasted no time shutting it down. He brushed off Maston's story, calling it baseless and lacking any real proof. To him, it was nothing more than a bunch of accusations with no receipts, and he wasn't about to entertain it. Don never faced an investigation or charges for assault, but his past wasn't exactly clean. His legal troubles showed up in his marriage, where things got messy enough for him to get arrested for attacking his wife. Instead of fighting it out in court, he cut a deal and walked away with 3 years of probation.
Right now, we turn our attention to the Soul Train gang, the Soul Train line, the master storyteller, Mr. Curtis Makefield, and the Show Enough False Peace Show, one it chose to call Get Down.
Don also ended up in another kind of headline nobody wants. Cops rolled up to his place in LA after a domestic violence call and hauled him off to Van Nuys jail that night. They didn't name names, but his second wife, Victoria Chapman Cornelius, had already filed for divorce. Funny enough, despite all that, she was still putting his address on official forms like nothing had changed. Don walked out of jail before sunrise, dropping $50,000 to get released, but the drama was just getting started. He denied everything in court, but Victoria wasn't backing down. She got multiple restraining orders against him. A few months later, he switched up his strategy, going with a no contest plea. That move kept him out of jail, but it also locked him into 36 months of probation. One wrong move, and he'd be right back behind bars. People couldn't stop talking about it. The man who built Soul Train was tangled up in headlines that had nothing to do with music once again, and the stories following him weren't the kind anyone wanted attached to their name. Don's been no to issues with a couple other people in the industry. Take Dick Clark, for example.
You do too. I know when I was growing up, my brother played guitar too, you know, and every time I'd say, hey man, teach me how to play guitar, he'd say, get away, squirt.
Dick Clark wasn't about to let Soul Train run the show without a fight. He threw together his own version, hoping to snag the same crowd. But people weren't feeling it. The whole thing looked like a calculated move to shove Soul Train out of the picture, and plenty of folks called it out for being straight up shady. Don wasn't about to let someone swoop in and hijack what he built. Seeing it as a direct threat, he brought in heavyweight backup, Jesse Jackson. Together, they went all in, calling out what looked like a calculated move to shut down the only black-owned show of its kind.
The pretty lady on my left, It's Miss Gladys Knight. Hi, Gladys.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
Very good.
Hey, I'm glad to have you here with us today.
It's our pleasure.
The backlash was loud, and ABC didn't want the smoke. After just a few episodes, they pulled the plug on Soul Unlimited. People weren't here for it, seeing it as a shady move that disrespected everything Cornelius had built with Soul Train.
And now, here is your host, Don Cornelius.
Once the dust settled, Clark and Cornelius decided to call a truce. Instead of beefing, they teamed up on a TV special spotlighting R&B and soul artists. The move proved that at the end of the day, keeping black music front and center mattered more than any rivalry. He also had issues with artists like Rick James. Rick and Don didn't just do interviews, they went toe-to-toe. On the surface, it was all laughs and compliments, but underneath, they were sizing each other up like two people who both wanted the last word. Every exchange had that unspoken challenge. Who was really in control here? Rick had history with Soul Train, and Don never let him forget it. One time, Rick got all sentimental saying the show taught him how to dance. Don barely missed a beat before pointing out that might not have been such a good thing. The crowd ate it up, but Rick wasn't about to let Don get the upper hand. He clapped back, calling out Don's signature move, standing perfectly still and calling it dancing. It was all in good fun. Or at least, that's what they wanted people to think.
Wait, by the way, has anybody ever seen Don Cornelius dance? He's got his own dance. It's called The Cool. You just stand there.
Then came the moment that really made it clear. These two weren't just playing around. Rick started flexing about his record-breaking shows, casually dropping stadium numbers like they were nothing. Don gave him his props, but there was something in his tone, just the slightest hint of doubt. Rick caught it immediately.
For you.
Yes, Don.
Couldn't happen to a better person.
Hey, well, that's what I said last time I was on your show, and you disagreed with me.
Well, I've been wrong before, brother. You know, I know I said you would never be nothing.
He brought up how Don wasn't so sure about his success, and Don, he straight up admitted it. He had doubted Rick, but now he had to sit there and acknowledge that Rick had proved him wrong. Rick took that win with a smirk, and Don tried to brush past it like it didn't sting.
Now I gotta eat my words,
I said the same thing about you, and I was true.
Whatever tension people caught on camera, that was just the beginning. Off-screen, they clashed. Don liked order, Rick thrived in chaos. The audience loved Rick's energy, but Don wasn't convinced. The flashy looks, the unpredictable attitude, the refusal to tone anything down. It was clear Don thought Rick was too much, and Rick thought Don was out of touch. Then Don took it there. He brought up Rick's reputation, the stuff people whispered about when he wasn't in the room. Most artists would have dodged it, but Rick, he leaned right into it. He made it clear that being unpredictable was exactly why he was a star. That's when the interviews started feeling less like a performance and more like something personal. And then Rick said the one thing that Don couldn't ignore. He called Soul Train outdated, said it wasn't keeping up, that artists like him were the future. That got back to Don real fast, and let's just say the invites stopped rolling in. At first, Rick's appearances slowed down, then they stopped altogether. And just like that, Soul Train moved on without him. But Rick's success is not the only thing Don's been wrong about. He didn't think hip-hop was here to stay either.
And from New York, let's welcome a super hot rap crew as they join us to do this.
When rap acts started showing up on Soul Train, Don wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet. He had that skeptical look, like he was trying to figure out if this whole thing was just a passing trend. Spoiler? It wasn't. Hip-hop kept growing, and the gap between Soul Train's old-school roots and where the culture was heading just got wider. Sugar Hill artists weren't feeling the hesitation. They saw it as Don holding the genre back, keeping it off the stage like it wasn't worth the airtime. Then came Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. Flash was the name in hip-hop at the time, and their performance should have been a moment. Instead, it turned into one of those interviews where Don made it painfully clear he wasn't sold. He didn't get the turntables, didn't get the rapping, and barely tried to hide it. The whole thing felt off. and anyone watching could see the group wasn't exactly loving the energy. Hip-hop fans clocked it immediately. Then came the shift no one could ignore, gangsta rap. The lyrics got realer, the beats got heavier, and the industry scrambled to catch up. Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, they had the whole game in a chokehold. But Soul Train, not so much. Don, with his deep love for classic R&B, wasn't in a rush to bring that world onto his stage. Compared to shows like Yo MTV Raps and BT, Soul Train wasn't exactly the first stop for hardcore rap. And at a certain point, people started wondering, was Don keeping up or was he just staying in his lane?
Dear y'all, my name is Shamar Moore, and believe me when I tell you, we getting ready to have some fun up in here. Why? Because I stand up here week after week trying to get you hyped over the fact that don't nobody throw a party like we do.
After running the Soul Train show for more than 20 years, Don finally stepped back. His health wasn't great, and instead of being the face of the show, he shifted to pulling the strings behind the scenes as the executive producer. The transition left Soul Train without a steady host for a while, and it took a few years before someone officially filled his spot. For a few years, Soul Train kept things interesting by rotating guest hosts, big names from Black entertainment, all bringing their own spin to the show. Eventually, the producers landed on Maestro Clark, a comedian from LA who had learned from some of the best in the game. He had the jokes, the energy, and a fresh appeal for younger viewers. But behind the scenes, he and Cornelius didn't always see things the same way. After 2 years, Clark was out, and the show was back to searching for a new face. Next up was Shamar Moore, the actor and model who brought serious energy to the show, and even threw in some dance moves that had people talking. He stuck around for a solid 4 years, keeping things fun and lively. But once his time was up, the producers wanted to switch things up again. Dorian Gregory, who had already stepped in as a guest host back in the day, finally got the full-time spot in 2003. Cornelius had his eye on him for a while, so it wasn't a huge surprise. Gregory held it down for the last 3 seasons before the show finally wrapped. After 35 years of setting the tone for music and dance on TV, Soul Train finally reached the end of the line. It had been a huge part of pop culture, shaping generations and giving Black artists a space to shine. Even after it wrapped, reruns kept the legacy alive for a bit longer until the company behind it shut down, bringing the whole era to a close. After decades at the helm, Don Cornelius passed the torch, selling Soul Train to Mad Vision Entertainment. He had put in the work and was ready to step back. Not long after, Magic Johnson's team swooped in and took over. With big ideas to keep the brand alive, one of their moves, turning Soul Train into a full-on experience with a music cruise, stacking the lineup with icons like Kool and the Gang, Chaka Khan, and Nile Rodgers. Soul Train landed at BET, the same network that had already brought back the Soul Train Awards years earlier. They weren't just trying to keep the name alive, they were looking for ways to level it up. The brand had been through plenty of changes, but no matter what, it still meant something in music and TV. Don Cornelius took Soul Train from nothing and turned it into the place for Black music and culture. He put artists on the map, shaped the industry, and left behind a legacy that still hits today. But the polished image, that was just one side of the story. Behind the scenes, he was intense, obsessed with control, and in the end, completely isolated. His story wasn't just about making it big, it was about power, drama, and the cost of running the show. So was he a genius who never got his due, or did he let his own ego take him down? Let's hear it. And if you're into deep dives like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching. Love, peace, and soul.